I am Carinne,
And I'm Andrew.
and we are the new Botanist. Today we're talking about the Chinese money plant. Andrew, maybe you can start by describing the plant because it's quite a striking looking plant, isn't it?
Yes, it's very striking, especially the leaves. So it is known as the Chinese money plant, but it has many different names due to the circular shaped leaves. So it's also known as the UFO plant or the pancake plant. The general Latin name that we use for the species that we commonly get in the shop is Pilea peperomioides, and it's an evergreen perennial from the southern region of China, and it was interestingly popularized by a Norwegian missionary in 1956. So it became very popular in Scandinavia before permeating down to Europe. This plant grows upwards, but has these long stems and then these sort of disc circular shaped leaves, and it sort of sticks out almost like a bottle brush. And then as it grows older, bottom leaves die off, and then it grows upwards. So it's very unusual shape, and of course it can breed like mad.
You're right about that because when I bought mine, I think it was quite a small one and I paid £15 for it. And now every single time I look at my plant, I think, why on earth did I pay £15 for it? Because there are at least three or four little ones just growing either at the bottom, but sometimes at the stem as well. Have you seen that?
My one hasn't done that yet, so your one must be very happy. Usually they come at the bottom, and then if you get a little knife or scissors, cut them off, put them into soil, and then within weeks it'll be ready for sale or giving out to your friends or some sort of exchange. It's known as the Chinese money plant, A, because it's from China, and it produces so many babies, you could sell them on and make money.
Okay, so what I generally do with mine is put them in a bit of water until the it starts to get roots. Can you miss out on that step?
Oh, you could do that as well. So a lot of people put them into water, little bits of water, so you can actually see the roots. So it's hydroponic growth, so it looks fancy. Or you can put into soil. So there's a variety of methods. As long as the roots aren't exposed to the sort of air, it should be all right.
So it doesn't even have to be a very long bit that you cut off, because when you cut them off, you just have a bit of bare stem, and you can stick
Mhm.
that straight into the soil.
Yeah. So if the baby, it's about 5 centimeters tall, so it's relatively big baby. You can then cut it off, and as long as you've got a couple of roots and a bit of the stem, pop it into soil within a couple of weeks, it will proliferate, and then it'll produce babies, and then they'll produce babies, and then they'll produce babies.
So I've got a few of those now, obviously, because of all the babies. Um, and they are in different places across my house, and there are different light conditions, and they all seem to be
Mhm.
growing slightly differently. So some that are in quite dark places are very leggy, like they have a very long stem and quite sort of
Mhm.
sparse foliage, whereas the ones that are in much brighter conditions are quite sort of like they have large leaves, but they're quite very dense and keep quite low. Is that something common to them?
Yeah. So what you're describing is common to all plants. So if you put them in too darker conditions, they grow a bit leggy, so they're almost reaching for the sun and trying to find food essentially. But with Chinese money plants, the way they are formed, so it's very unusual. Generally, they're sort of like indirect sunlight. So this is on a windowsill that's not south facing, but you can put it virtually anywhere as long as it's not purely in the dark. So they're very tough cookies. Well, the invasive species actually. But if you put them slightly in too much sort of dark, the stems will grow more leggy, the leaves will grow bigger. If you put them in direct sunlight, so south face window, they'll sort of become quite squat. So ideally, it should be indirect sunlight, but if you want leggy growth, put them in slightly darker conditions, so semi-shade. Or if you want more compact growth, put them into full sunlight on a south-facing window.
So I did have one. Well, I still have it, and it's very big now. But I put it. It was in a very sunny spot, and it started to go. The stem started to go red. Have you seen that before? And do you know what is causing that? Is that the bright light as well?
So generally when the stems go a bit red or very red, it's more to do with the watering schedule. So these plants don't like, they like watering and then the soil to be dry and then water. So some people, I've done it myself, where you water them, this top bit of the soil is dry, but below is not, and they get a bit stressed. So when you overwater them, they go a bit reddish. But the easiest way to sort of fix that is to take the plant out the pot that you've got it in and put some sort of dry material, kitchen towel below, and then try and dry the pot out as much as possible. The redness eventually will fade, but it's a sign of stress, and usually it's to do with the watering schedule.
So what are other things, other common problems that can happen to the plant?
The watering schedule is quite a big one. Again, overwatering, sometimes underwatering, so it sort of droops. So if your plants are drooping, check the soil. And another problem is the nutrients. So these plants tend to grow like mad, so they need a lot of nutrients, particularly nitrogen. Usually on the surface of the leaf, it can be a bit yellow. If it goes a bit reddish pink, that's phosphorus, sometimes potassium. So if your leaves are going a bit discolored, do fertilize. And sometimes when the leaves get old, they just go a bit dark, go black and crispy, and they'll drop off. If leaves do drop off, that's perfectly normal for Chinese money plants.
How often would you say you would need to fertilize your plant?
So in the summer, I would probably recommend maybe every 2 weeks. It's purely dependent on how fast it's growing, what conditions it's in. Of course, these are from the southern region of China and nice sort of rainforests and what have you. So it's very different compared to a house. So just watch your plants. They'll soon give you a sign when it needs some extra nutrients. And so if you see slight yellowing, check if it needs watering. If it doesn't, then it's a fertilizer issue. And again, another problem that it's just come to my mind is compaction. So Chinese money plants are invasive species in their natural habitat. So the roots grow very quickly and they tend to get very compact in their pot very quickly, especially if they're producing lots of babies. So if your plant is producing lots of little babies, cut them off, and then you need to take the plant out the pot and then tease the roots out a bit, snap some roots. Don't be too harsh, but don't be too gentle, and then put it back in the same pot or put it in a bigger pot. And another tip I can safely say that does work. I've used it before. If you get a stick or a chopstick, which is quite good, and stab it into the soil, do 6 or 7 stabs, that tends to break some of the roots, allows water to permeate below, and it frees up some space.
Do you think you have to cut the babies out? Currently, one of my plants has actually got 2 babies underneath, well, sort of at the bottom, and they are actually getting quite large, but I can't quite get to cutting them off. And also, I haven't really had time to cut them off. But am I damaging my bigger plant by leaving them in?
Essentially, you would need to remove them because then competition happens. So similar to the spider plant that we previously discussed, having lots of babies, it looks quite nice right next to the plant, but it's taking resources from the mother plant. So eventually, if they get too big, they'll start competing. The baby's roots will then start fighting with the mother's roots, and of course, it's still attached to the mother, so it's going to be taking resources from this poor plant. So you can keep them on for a certain amount of time, but eventually, compaction competition is going to hurt the mother at some point.
It's become quite a sort of fashionable plant, hasn't it?
Back in 1946, it was introduced to Norway. It eventually took off, went to Sweden, eventually the rest of Scandinavia. It was a very IKEA-ish plant. And then it came over to the UK in the 70s, died back in popularity, and now it's back again with this recent resurge of houseplants. So it is a very beautiful plant, and if grown in the perfect conditions, these disc leaves can grow 10 centimeters. They're so quirky.
Absolutely. They look so stylish. I think it's one of the first ones that I really, really wanted to get when I started getting back into having lots of plants. So, and I mean, it was a good one to start with as well, because it just, it did give me so many others. So now I've got lots across the house.
Yeah, I would conclude that the Chinese money plant is a gateway plant to more plants.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you will join us again next time for more tips and tricks on how not to kill your plants.
If you'd like us to cover a specific plant or have any other questions, you can get in touch via botanicaldoctor.co.uk.